two main things that you learn when you first start boxing: jab and footwork.
I don't think it was anything that really put him in danger, but it certainly spoiled his usual momentum that he's able to build and really destroy people with.
Thank you, Michael. This is Raena Rhone with your KO Fightcast.
My name's Stephanie, and this is the Rewind segment. I want to bring back one of the best matches in 1982.
Welcome to Knockouts Unlimited. I'm your host, Joshua Burns.
And I'm your host, Michael Opdyek.
We have a couple fights to talk about, a couple interesting fights that went on. We would like to share this with you all. So let's get your take on some of these fights. Let's start off with the Ellis and Vila fight. What did you think about that?
I was very surprised with the outcome, but I will say I thought that Ellis had an excellent start. Really took his foot off the gas there in the middle, and Vila did an excellent job of coming back strong there at the end. What were your thoughts?
My thoughts, when I initially saw the record of Vila, I knew, okay, this is a guy who has a puncher's chance. Have not seen much of him, but I knew he had a puncher's chance. I knew of Ellis, I knew Rashidi could box, and I knew he was going to go in there and do his thing as far as boxing-wise. When the fight started and I saw how Vila was just sitting there taking punches and letting Ellis box him, and Ellis was doing what he usually do, jab, move, covering up, defense was good early part. I said, okay, now this is becoming interesting. Now I want to see how Ellis finishes the fight, because I know fighting a fighter that has a lot of knockouts like Vila had, I know he's looking for the later rounds. He's looking to take the opponent out in the later rounds, and because he was going up against a pure boxer in Ellis, that's exactly what he planned on doing. And showing that he had that knockout power in the later rounds, that set good for Vila. Ellis, he got a little tired towards the middle to late rounds, and that was kind of his demise, but I thought it was a good fight. I didn't totally agree with the decision, but I thought it was a good fight.
Yeah, going back to the decision, you had to wonder the knockdown that took place in the last round that wasn't scored. Certainly that had to affect it pretty greatly.
Yes, it did. I didn't think that was a big swing though when it comes to knockdowns. So you look at it, it was 2 knockdowns in one round. That would make it a 7 round. Then you had another knockdown, so it was enough. That was like a 5-point swing. So he did do enough to get back in the fight, but I felt like Ellis built up enough lead on the scorecard. He built up enough points to have that fight comfortably in his hands. I think he should have won by a couple points. If not, that could have at least been a draw. But I just didn't think Vila pulled it out. But it sets up an interesting rematch.
It does, and it does bring into question, can Vila do that against more skilled opponents?
And you're absolutely right about that. It does bring the question up. And the other question to that is, if there are any more skilled opponents, would they be in better condition? Will they start conditioning themselves to go the full distance, you know, with someone like Vila who's coming to win the fight in the later rounds?
Certainly.
So let's move on to the next fight. For all in all, that was a good fight that took place. Let's move on to Andrade. So we have Andrade and Nicholson. So what is your take on that?
So it certainly seemed like Andre put on a lot of gas there at the front, did a great job getting his jab started up and making sure that he was keeping distance, keeping Nicholson occupied in his high guard, and not letting him really find any type of rhythm. About the middle of the fight, Nicholson seemed to find some type of space to go ahead and move and begin to play his game, but it didn't seem that he had the gas tank to maintain it. And then you saw Andre come back in the later rounds and really keep him from being able to capitalize, even though, again, within the middle rounds, say around 7 or 8, you did see Nicholson score several good straight punches down the pipe that seemed to not necessarily rock Andre, but took him off balance from where he had been in the earlier rounds.
No, I agree with your assessment. I think Andre did what Andre typically does. He went out there, he makes it an ugly fight, he tries to rough you up and just beat you down. Nicholson, he started out slow. He started out kind of timid. You know, he was kind of reluctant on getting himself going and throwing punches. I think that had a lot to do with the name of Andre. I think that had something to do with that. But once he started going, you know, you saw him get in a little rhythm. He started landing some punches. They had a little war of words inside the ring. They were talking to each other a lot more. I would rather see Nicholson go ahead and try to establish a game plan instead of a lot of the mouthing he was doing. But all in all, it came down to Andre dictated, and he did whatever he wanted to do in there with him. Andre, I would say, he's going to always make it an ugly fight. If you let him make it an ugly fight, he will do so. But he wants to go in there and rough you up and just beat you down. And he's constantly calling out the top names, and that's what you want to see about seeing a fighter. You want to see them call out the top names. But is he doing enough to show that he belongs in the ring with them?
That is a question, and I think that a common theme we're going to see with several of the fights that we discuss is that strong start on the people who won either on the scorecards or within the fight, but kind of waning in the middle rounds or not necessarily capitalizing on the momentum they built up in the start. And I think the Andre fight is a really excellent example of that. Can he do that as he begins to call out those bigger and bigger names? And will he have the conditioning, going back to our Ellis and Villa fight, will he have that conditioning to be able to push through into the later rounds with the success he's built in the early rounds?
And that's our time for now. Let's be ready for a break. We'll be right back with Knockouts Unlimited.
Dad?
Just 1 minute, okay?
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Can birds draw pictures?
I don't have an answer for that.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
It's not about where you were born. It's not about your gender. Or the color of your skin. Or whether you're rich, poor, or in the middle. No matter what you play, if you have the skill and drive to succeed in school and in sports, we'll provide the opportunity.
Welcome back to Knockouts Unlimited. Now let's talk about the next fight. Let's talk about the Ennis and Chikazian fight. What was your take on that?
Certainly. It was very interesting seeing the problems that Chikazian provided to Ennis. I don't think it was anything that really put him in danger, but it certainly spoiled his usual momentum that he's able to build and really destroy people with. It was very interesting to see Ennis kind of play around. It seemed like he would start to build up momentum, but never really to capitalize on it. Chikazian had some very interesting footwork to watch and put together some very, very nice combinations, but never really seemed to land multiple shots with him, usually landing on the last one or two, and not really putting anything together that's caused substantial damage. What were your thoughts?
I thought Ennis went out there and tried to look for an impressive victory, an impressive knockout. And what he found himself doing is looking like an impressive amateur. That's what he found. Chikazian made him miss a lot. He confused him with a lot of his movement. And for someone like Boots Ennis to be as skillful as he is and not have a game plan or a reaction to the movement that Chikazian brought to the table shows that he still has a lot to work on. Or shows that once he gets his mind wrapped around looking impressive and going for a knockout, that he can't unwind his mind from that mentality. All in all, it was a good fight. It was a good learning experience for Boots. But if he wants to be the champion that everybody thinks he can be, he needs to go back to the drawing board and stay focused and work on different things. He needs to look at the film of this fight and learn from it.
Certainly. With somebody who has such a strong defensive style like Chikhedzian, what do you think that Boots could do differently to allow him to capitalize on it? Is it just not trying to showboat as much as he did, or is there something specific that he needs to do from a technical aspect?
From the aspect, he needed footwork, he needed more footwork and a jab. So the two main things that you learn when you first start boxing, jab and footwork. He did not cut off the ring like he should have. If he would have cut off the ring and utilized that jab more, he would have made that an easier fight for himself, and he possibly would have gotten a knockout. I was impressed with the punches that Chikhedzian took, though. He did take some good punches, and he did good. He did good for himself. He was accountable for his fighting, but I don't know if that's how he would fight all the time against Boots. I think it was more of he was fighting the name instead of actually fighting the fighter.
Certainly.
So we'll see more of Boots, see if he makes the adjustments from this fight and where he goes from here. Now let's move into our Tank Davis fight, the main event, him and Garcia. What was your take on that?
Beautiful, beautiful counter work by Garcia. I think that he really gave Tank some problems in the early going. Once Tank found his rhythm and found his footing, he started to really, really land good power shots on the end of his combinations, also coming through with strong right hands that, as we saw, ultimately wore Garcia down and forced him to have to quit in between rounds. What was your feeling?
I still think Tank takes a lot longer to get started than he should. He computes all that information from the fights, from round one until whenever the fight ends. His brain is like a computer. He's soaking up all the information he needs to make the adjustments to stop his opponent. But during that time, he's losing rounds. And as he move up in competition, like he's scheduled to fight Ryan Garcia next, once you start moving up in level like that, you're not afforded the opportunity to lose rounds, to give rounds away like that, because you may give too many away and you may not be able to stop the guy at the end. I would like Tank to be a better starter as for that, because he's always a shorter guy, so he needs to jump on it a lot sooner. He has the defense, and Tank doesn't get credit for his defense because he does get touched a lot. But he has good defensive skills. But he needs to utilize the defense and offense, make it interchangeable instead of going from one to the other. Just make everything interchangeable, and then his power will show more dynamic, and his boxing skills will be on point.
Certainly. I think one of the things that really impressed me, again, going back to Garcia, was the counterfighting he did early on in the fight. The other aspect that I think is important to point out is, can Tank maintain his concentration on the fight throughout it? Because maybe a more skilled fighter, and maybe even Ryan Garcia, when he faces him, is able to capitalize on Tank not being completely focused on what is in front of him.
And I agree with that. Tank did lose focus yesterday as far as the little melee that happened in the audience. But all in all, that was a good fight, good win for Tank, and let's see what goes on with this next fight. In the meantime, let's throw it to our correspondent, Stephanie Maldonado, for Rewind.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Michael. My name's Stephanie, and this is the Rewind segment. I want to bring back to one of the best matches in 1982, performed by Pryor and Alexis Arguello, holding 4 titles in different 4 weight classes. I want to say from the initial start, Pryor was the initial attacker. Started off strong, and Alexis Arguello keeping his composure, using more strategy. Rounds 1 through 4, we could see that Pryor was the one throwing most of the punches. Arguello, unfortunately, by the 14th round, he was knocked out by a right hand, and it also brought a lot of controversy towards their trainers, especially Pryor's trainer, Panama, Supposedly he was tampering with the boxer's gloves. And that's my take for the Rewind segment. Back to you guys.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was an excellent segment. Now, a brief commercial break.
If you hear me clearly. It's great as the lake, but I make you eerie. Hoodie on, nighttime, do that make you feel me? Hold on, I'ma make you hear me. How many times have you heard, please step out of the car? Do me a nice favor, keep your hands where they are. Don't sneeze, hope God bless you, they'll shoot like a star. And I said, hey, not who, cause we know who they are. We could shine the light, say what's wrong and what's right. But to me, I ain't had that choice. It's just like, I know shorties who would die for their chain and it's just ice. And it's crazy how we express ourselves and it's just mics.
Welcome back to Knockouts Unlimited. I'm your host, Joshua Burns.
And I'm your host, Michael Opdyek.
So let's get into some of these upcoming fights that possibly can take place, or what we want to see some of the fighters from the card go after. Let's talk about Andre. So what would you like to see him do next, or who you would like to see him fight?
You know, I'd love to see him get an opponent that'll start pressuring him right off the bat. With the Nicholson fight, you saw Nicholson, again, really slow to start, trying to find his rhythm. Andre was able to sit on the outside, play the fencer, even, paying homage to the mask that he wore into the ring, and begin picking his opponent apart. Did he capitalize that in the later rounds? Not as much as we'd like to see. But again, I think an opponent that will give him pressure early on will really make for an exciting fight with him and force him to have to grow within this division that he's in.
And I agree. I think any of the top guys at that 168 pound would do well. It would give us a good litmus test of what Andre can do, how he can perform with that elite level. All in all, he has what it takes. Like I mentioned before, he has that amateur pedigree. He knows how to box. Does he always use a nice boxing style? No. He goes in there and makes it as regular as possible. Anything he can do to get the win. But with that said, he hasn't faced anyone that really pressures him back. Anyone that will put him on that back foot. He hasn't had that level of competition yet. And that's not because he doesn't want it. Andre he's trying to get these fights. No one is willing to jump in the ring with him because, for one, they say he talks too much. A lot of times you can talk, when you're trying to build yourself into a fight, you also take yourself away from a fight because people just feel like you're too agitating. They don't want to deal with you then. A lot of promoters don't want to work with you. Fighters don't want to fight you. When that landscape, he has a lot to make adjustments for himself, how he wants to go about getting these fights. I know he's been trying to get the Jamal Charlo fight, and I would love to see that fight take place because that would really be a good fight for Andre.
Absolutely. I think the Charlo fight would really give him a test to figure out whether or not he belongs at the top of this division or if he's ascended as far as he can.
And you have said that he may have gone, who knows, he may have reached his peak. And we will never know if he never gets those fights that he needs to fight. Otherwise, we're just speculating whether he reached his peak or not. But he does have the talent. We know he has the talent. Now we just need him to get the opponent to bring that talent out so we can see, oh yes, this is Andre. This is a person that we see why they've been avoiding. Can we say that right now? No, because he hasn't had that test. But will we be able to see it? I think eventually we will get the fights that we need to see with Andre. As long as he stays active, we will see good fights coming his way.
Excellent. Well, why don't we move on to our co-main event of Boots and Chikedzian. I would love to see Boots take on Errol Spence. Certainly, Errol Spence Jr. is the next opponent he has to take on. Correct?
Well, he is the mandatory, and that's the route he wanted to go. He wanted to take that IBF route so he could be mandatory for Spence. After looking at him last night, though, that would be the wrong decision for him. he showed that he still had a lot to work on. Now, I always say I do not gauge by one fight, because that was one fight. It said he probably went in there keen on a knockout and that was it. But we did see some flaws. So that is our time for that.
Now, let's welcome Raena Rhone for the KO Fightcast.
Thank you, Michael. This is Raena Rhone with your KO Fightcast. First up, we have Ajagba versus Shaw on ESPN Plus at 10 p.m. Eastern. On January 20th at 9 p.m. Eastern, we have Hemphill versus Stevens, which will be shown on Showtime. On January 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern, Eubank Jr. will be fighting Liam Smith on Sky Sports. Also on January 21st, we have Stiverne versus Guidry on DonKing.com at 9 p.m. Eastern. On January 28th on ESPN Plus and BT Sport, Bethlehem will be going up against Yard at 2 p.m. Eastern. The Charlo versus Zoo fight, scheduled for the end of January, has now been postponed. Moving on to February, we have Navarrete versus Wilson on ESPN Plus on February 3rd at 10 p.m. Eastern. To be streamed on DAZN on February 4th at 9 p.m. Eastern, there will be 2 fights, Serrano versus Cruz and Baumgardner versus Mekhaled. Rescheduled to February 25th, we have Broner versus Redkoch on BLK Prime at 9 p.m. Eastern. And last but not least, we have DeCarlis versus Scardina on March 3rd at 2 p.m. Eastern. For more fight details, please look in the description below. This concludes your KO Fightcast. Back to you guys.
And that concludes our episode of Knockouts Unlimited. I'm your host, Joshua Burns.
I'm your host, Michael Opdyek.
Until next time.
This episode of Knockouts Unlimited was brought to you by the Blue Planet Media Group.